Hey, welcome to Hired How to Get the Job, our weekly discussion and Q&A, and I appreciate you joining. If you don't know who I am, my name is Tony Martin. I write a blog called Hired or How to Get the Job. I also have a YouTube channel called Hired How to Get the Job, Facebook and Instagram. Please follow me in all those places so you can get all these content and all these tips and tricks, because I certainly, I do resume writing, I do mock interviews, I coach people, I help them. I do all those things. But this stuff is the free stuff that hopefully everyone can take advantage of. And today, if you're newly graduating college, this is going to be a good opening discussion for you. If you're wondering about what salaries are looking like right now, this will be as best of a discussion as I can give you right now based on that, and also a little overview of companies that are hiring, and then we'll get into our discussion and our Q&A. So as always, if you have any questions, post them in the comments while you're watching. I will get to them. And with that, let's first talk about an article that I recently read. This guy is George Anders. He writes some pretty good articles. This one was about the top cities to launch your career in across the country. And really what he did is he took, and I'm going to, again, use my great technical ability here. We need to up our budget, so we need to get some more clients. Feel free to share this with anyone that might need my help. But he used an article, and he was talking about where to launch your career. Now, as you can see on this table, and this is through LinkedIn, and I did like it. So if you are following me on LinkedIn, feel free to take a look at this there. But if you're really looking to launch your career, the best place is St. Louis, followed by Milwaukee, Cleveland, etc. Now, he actually did this a little differently than I would have done it. What he said is the median rent and the median salary, and whichever location gives you the most of your salary as a percentage was rated higher. I did it a little differently. I said, well, whichever city gives you the most income after you pay your rent is better. But again, my wife, who's brilliant, said, well, what about the cost of living and the cost of groceries and all that stuff? So I'm sure he probably has a better situation for that. But ultimately, what I figured out was I did a quick table, and Houston, and since I live here, I have to be biased, right? Houston will give you roughly 76.3% of your salary after you pay for rent on a median level. But they leave you about $53,000, whereas St. Louis will leave you about $48,000, but about 80% of your rent, or your 80% of your salary left. So I'd prefer to have $53,000 versus $48,000 left over. But the article is solid. And if you're newly graduating from college and you're open to relocation, you're trying to figure out where you want to move to. I actually talked to a guy yesterday, and he is open to looking. When I asked him where he was looking to relocate to, he said, yeah, I'm absolutely open. I'm looking to move to Hawaii, Southern California. And of course, I have 2 kids. I'm a conservative heart. I save a lot. Like, dude, you probably shouldn't start your career in Hawaii. I've lived in Hawaii. When I was in the Marines for a very short amount of time. It is expensive. I have good friends who live in Hawaii now. It's an expensive place to live, and I'm not sure the salary you're going to be able to demand coming out of college is really going to justify that location. The gist of this article, though, and this is good for anybody, even if you're switching careers right now, the gist of this article is pick an employer that's a top-tier employer. We're going to get into this with one of our questions today, but as you're evaluating opportunities, don't just evaluate the job, evaluate the employer, because you want to make sure that that company is going to be around, that there's going to be opportunity for growth. And as you start your career, a name brand employer will have more of a draw if you're going to continue to market yourself out there than it will to just necessarily be working in a role that you might grow in and things like that. If you're the VP of a company nobody knows about, it's less impressive than being a senior manager at IBM. So with that kind of leads me to the second article that I stumbled upon this week, which was by Andrew Seaman. Now, Andrew, again, I referenced him last week. If you do hashtag hiring now, not that I want to promote somebody other than me, but he has really good information, okay, on LinkedIn. And Andrew was talking about the companies that are hiring. Now, there's 10 pages of these companies that are hiring right now. He seems to update this pretty regularly. He works for LinkedIn, so obviously he's close to the source. And if you're close to the source, then you know then you know what jobs are being posted. And that's one of those examples. LinkedIn is a top tier employer, right? If you call someone saying you work for LinkedIn, a lot of times they answer the phone because LinkedIn is well known. Same thing when you're going into a sales role. You want to join a company that's well known if you're starting off, because sometimes just having that name behind yours gets your customers to actually answer the phone, and then you can build your brand and you can build who you are and have a customer follow you versus not knowing anybody. So with that, I went through this sheet here, or these sheets, and I highlighted companies that are, in my opinion, top tier companies, because yes, 90% of the companies here are companies that if you're establishing your career, you may not want to work for. And I don't mean that negatively, but I mean, if a company is hiring 300,000 people, chances are a lot of them are going to be cashiers, are going to be people who are either starting their career or people who are not as career focused as a professional in the corporate world. So, but FedEx is hiring 35,000 people. USAA is going to be hiring 10,500 people this year. Northrop Grumman, military contractor, hiring about 10,000 people all across the U.S. ByteDance, which is TikTok's parent company. Now, many people have told me I should be on TikTok. I'm not quite sure that's the right forum for me. However, if you do want to take a look, ByteDance looks like they're hiring about 10,000 people this year. What else? PepsiCo is hiring about 6,000 people. Nestle is 5,000. Lockheed Martin looks like they're going to be hiring about 5,000 people this year. Tractor Supply Company, 5,000 people. IBM, which I think is here in Houston, is 3,000 people. United Wholesale Mortgage, 2,500. JP Morgan, 2,500. UPS, 2,400. Capital One, 1,300. Nokia. Now, I don't necessarily honestly know if Nokia is a top tier employer. I don't mean to disparage Nokia. I just simply think that Nokia is when I think of Nokia, I think of the phone I had in 1996 that was about this big, and they had the corner of the cell phone market back in 1996. But maybe there's new stuff. They look like they're hiring 1,000 people globally. AT&T, 800 positions this year. Electronic Arts, EA Arts, the video game company, 300 people. Pfizer, 600 people. Apple, 600 roles. And again, with Apple, I don't know, are they talking about store people? Or are they talking about people to work in the, in Silicon Valley? I'm not quite sure. But point is, eBay's hiring 400 people. Bank of America, 500. This list goes on and on and on. There's probably 30 companies per page. I'm on page 6 right now. HP, 300 people. Northwest Mutual. I just cherry picked a whole bunch. But the point is companies are starting to hire again, and companies have plans to hire. So need to make sure that you're positioned correctly to take advantage of that. And as always, if you wanted that full list or you want access, feel free to LinkedIn me. I'll send you these articles. Feel free to just look through my activity. You should see that I've liked them or reposted them, and happy to keep that that information flowing. With that, again, remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them anytime. What I wanted to talk to you about today, though, after those articles, was be weary of people, or maybe leery. I'm not sure which is the right word here. This is when I need the thesaurus app on my Word document to be able to tell me which synonym is the right one. But be aware that people that do what I do, who talk in absolutes, aren't always right. And what I mean by that is, I like to say something, there's no absolutes, but by me saying that, that's an absolute statement, and thus it can't be correct. So I will say, the majority of statements that are absolute statements saying, you should never do this, the majority of those statements, I can think of a situation when you should do that, okay? So for example, if you say, you should never, and this was actually a question last week, you should never put a company on your resume or have details about the job you held 10 years ago or more. Now, I got that question on Thursday. I said, I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that you shouldn't put them on there. I think there's many situations when you should. And then the very next day, I got to speak with a great guy who is a president in his own organization, but he's actually resigning because he's just not passionate about that organization anymore. And frankly, he wants to be a VP again because he doesn't like the bureaucracy of dealing with the board, dealing with chief executives around him. He's much more passionate about mentoring and growing up leaders around him. He doesn't have that chance as a president, but he did have that chance as a VP. So guess what? He is going to be applying to VP roles. So my advice to him was highlight the roles you had 10 years ago when you were a VP level, because that's going to be all the relevant information. So if you ever hear someone say you should never do something, try to challenge them, and your spidey senses should go up, because they might just think their opinion matters a little bit too much. And something I've always said on this week after week, I feel like this is my 7th or 8th week doing this. Everything I tell you is my opinion. I've been blessed to have worked for several companies privately, and then I've been a contractor as an executive search guy or a staffing recruiting guy for a few dozen. So I have a swath of companies behind me that I feel like I've been able to shape my opinion based on that experience. But again, it's just my experience, and it's just my opinion. And the only opinion that matters is the person that's answering your call, or is the person that's looking at your resume. My opinion doesn't matter. I'm just hoping that my opinion is more mainstream than the majority of opinions you're hearing, and thus it'll help push you further along in most processes. But be aware, there's always a situation where my opinion, frankly, is wrong, and because it doesn't align with the person that you are applying towards. But so don't worry. So be aware of those absolute statements. Another one which I made last week, which is, and I thought about this after making that statement, you should never put references in the bottom of your resume. I'm still a big believer in that. I put that on Instagram yesterday. I don't think that for the vast majority of us, we should be listing our references on our resume. However, I can think of a scenario. If the CEO of the company is your neighbor and you want to name drop and put him on your resume, I probably would. If there's a person in the organization that you want to put as your reference, guess what? The company already has that information. I'm not saying you should blast out your resume to everybody in the world, but if you're applying to IBM and you happen to know the senior VP of procurement and you're applying to a different role, then that's perfectly fine. I would much rather, though, the senior VP of procurement hand walk and hand deliver your resume over to recruiting. I think that has a much better much better response than just putting a name at the bottom of a resume, because let's be honest, applicant tracking systems are not searching for key names. Applicant tracking systems are searching for keywords, and company employees are not keywords. So I think you have much better success forwarding your resume off to one of your buddies who works there, and then having them hand deliver your resume. So that's that. Now, we're going to go into the Q&A part. Again, any questions you have, feel free to type them in. These questions I received this week, as well as one from last week that I missed, which I'll start with. Russ from Clear Lake, Texas, wanted to ask this question, and he typed it, but I missed it last week. So when you're interviewing, and you get the question, why should I hire you over the 50 other candidates that we're currently interviewing? That's a great question. Now, and it happens a lot too, especially in this climate, okay? There's gonna be a lot of people that are looking, so there's gonna be, that question's gonna happen a lot, and the competition during an interview is gonna be steeper than ever. So when you get that kind of question, you wanna focus on your strengths. First of all, you wanna say something to the effect of, look, I don't know who else you're interviewing, but I do know, and you should memorize the job description to the best of your ability, but I do know that this job requires this. You're going to be doing, you're going to be doing a system upgrade in 6 months. I did that 3 years ago, so I really know the system pretty well. You use SAP, and I've used SAP for 7 years, so I feel like I'm really well versed in it. You have from what you've told me, you have a team of young people who really need some strong mentorship. I'm very passionate about leading. What you want to do when you get that question, because rarely are you going to get that question at the beginning of an interview. You're probably going to get that question midway or towards the end of the interview. And what the interviewer is hoping for is that you've picked up on things throughout the interview process that you can now regurgitate and tell him or her why you know what you're doing and you're a strong fit. Because if you just say, well, I'm a really strong fit, blah, 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 and you don't reference anything that you learned or discussed throughout the interview process or that are on the job description, then chances are you're going to bomb that question. But If throughout the course of the interview process, you've talked to 3 people and you're incorporating, well, Joe told me about this and I've kind of done that 2 years ago. Sarah told me about this and honestly, I haven't done that yet. But I've experienced that because when I joined the company, they had implemented the system already and I realized all the mistakes that were done through the implementation process. So there's ways to answer that question, but really the best way to answer the question is why should I hire you over X number of candidates that we're interviewing? Focus on the interview process up until this point, focus on what you've heard and regurgitate what you've heard back to them as strengths and solutions. And Polo, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. If you do put a person on your reference, on your resume, certainly make sure that you get their permission and make sure they're aware of it. But like I mentioned last week, I have been that guilty recruiter. If I am looking, and now if you're not an oil field guy, you're not going to understand this, but if I was looking for I'll just say a manager, a tool pusher, I would often look at drillers' resumes, which is the level below a tool pusher, and look for their references. And it would give me lists and lists of tool pushers. So what would I do? I wasn't looking for a driller, but I referenced a whole bunch of driller resumes, and then I would call a whole bunch of tool pushers because they were all references on the bottom of their resume. And Polo, you never got called. Your tool pusher got called, your supervisor got called, but Polo was just the conduit to get me to the guy I wanted to hire. So be aware that sometimes it can backfire on you. And then if your buddy isn't looking, I can use that negatively towards them and maybe, give them a conflict they didn't want to have, which is, should I take a new job or stay where I'm at? But thanks, Polo, for that. Good contribution. All right, the next question. This is a good question. Have salaries remained the same in the past few months, or are they lower now? Now, I did a lot of research on this question this week because I saw it coming over the weekend, and I wanted to be as prepared as I could to give you some factual information about where salaries have changed. Because let's face it, a lot has changed, right? Now, the only things I could find, and first of all, salaryexplorer.com. I've referenced a lot, payscale.com, salary.com, Indeed has salary, and Glassdoor. A new website that I'm a fan of is salaryexplorer.com. They seem to have legitimate stats, good graphs, good data to back everything up. And they all seem to be on the cutting edge of the information. But let's be honest, are any companies really filling out surveys right now? And if they are filling out surveys, has there been enough time since April 1st, the end of Q1? There's been 58 days since the end of Q1 to get to where we are today. Is 58 days really enough time to aggregate all this information and figure out where the trends are? So what I can tell you is that according to these websites, Q1 in 2020 saw a 0.5% increase from where we were in Q4 of 2019. But now we're well in the middle towards the bottom, the last third of Q3 or Q2, excuse me. So I don't know where we are. What I can tell you is that the majority of people that I've spoken with, their company, especially in oil and gas, has taken a 10, a 20, or a 30% pay cut. Everybody across the board in those companies taking pay cuts. I can tell you that we have over 37 million people that are laid off now. So if you hadn't received a pay cut, then guess what? You've received a furlough or a layoff. So this goes back to, we're going to come to that in a second, but this really goes to when you're evaluating opportunities, how you evaluate those opportunities, right? So when you're doing your research, you should always go to those websites when you're applying to a job and figure out what the salary used to be, okay? Figure out based on your knowledge, because you used to be in that role where the salary was, but don't be surprised if the salary is 10 or 20% lower than it was now, or lower than it was before. And then you have a decision to make, okay? When you apply to a job and you realize that, look, the job should be paying 100, they're paying 70. Do I really want to do that? You need to evaluate the opportunity, make sure it's a type of employer that's going to be around for a long time, okay? Because let's be honest, as the industry progresses, we should hopefully have a V-shaped recovery. If we have a U-shaped recovery, well, there's still lots of debates if there's going to be a V or U-shaped recovery. But let's just say it's a V or a U-shaped recovery. There's going to be growth, hopefully, end of this year, next year there'll be growth, right? As that growth happens, if you are in a role that you took a salary step back, but it's still the same title, I'm willing to bet you're going to see less of an increase in your salary as the year progresses and as they dig out of this hole, because you hired on in this salary. If you were given a salary cut, then I can certainly see you getting that salary back. But when you're hired in and you agree to make $70,000 a year as a procurement manager, knowing that the industry was $90,000 a year, there's some concerns I have that company's even going to be around as this recovery happens. So you might spend the next year working your butt off trying to help the company get where it needs to be, but there's so many flaws inside the system right now that the company doesn't recover. And then a year from now, you are laid off, and the company and the whole market has recovered around you, and you didn't have that opportunity to recover with it because now all the jobs you wanted have been taken. So I would much rather take a step back and roll. I would much rather take $70,000 to be a procurement analyst, knowing that I have the skills to be the manager if the analyst is paying at the right market level within reason, then taking the job of where I should be for the level and taking a step back. Hopefully that makes sense, because I definitely understand it's kind of complicated, but bottom line, focus on the role. Try to find a role that's paying people at the right compensation point, even if that role is one step below you, because I think you'll spring back faster than taking a role at the right level for less money. I think if the compensation's a concern for you, that's going to be a real, that's probably the best way to approach it. Now, again, there's no absolutes, right? So if there's no absolutes, realize that everybody's situation is different. If you're hurting and you need a job and you're hungry, well, then you take the job. But just realize that, again, the company might have some issues and they might not be around a year from now. So don't be so invested that you're dug in, especially if they're not a top tier employer that's well known, that has a good backlog or a good history, a good reputation. Because also, as the market recovers, many people around you might be leaving, and then now you're stuck on a team, and you're the sage advice giver who's been there for 6 months, and everyone around you has gone off somewhere else because they all took pay cuts. And when the market rebounded a little bit, other companies started paying what they should be paying, so all your peers left, and now you're stuck there, and you're still being underpaid. So be sure that you can justify. But these things, they should not be difficult or fearful conversations to have with a recruiter. You should not be fearful to talk about salary, okay? You should be able to have honest conversations with the recruiter about this, because when they say, what are you looking to make? We talk about this all the time. I won't go into that today. But when you say that, you should be able to spit back, well, I kind of think the market's changed a little bit. What are you guys seeing? I mean, I know that this role 6 months ago, 3 months ago, this role would have paid $120,000 a year, but I'm not even sure what it would pay today. I'm hoping it's going to pay $120,000 a year, but I really don't know. I mean, again, you're not saying you're going to take it, but you're saying that you've done your market research and you know that the market has changed and you're open to discussion. So the best information I can tell you is that the market hasn't figured out where it is as far as salaries are concerned. Let me read Polo's 37 million equal 1 out of every 4. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 23.1% of unemployment or something like that. But yeah, there's certainly, again, this is Great Depression numbers right now that we're dealing with salaries, but hopefully this V-shaped recovery, hopefully this comes in the first quarter or the next quarter that we get to with July and August and things like that. So salaryexplorer.com, salaries have certainly dropped over the last quarter. I don't know much other than that. I've searched many websites looking for information with articles, and there isn't anything out there. The only thing I can tell you is that because I talk to a dozen people a week, that's where I'm getting my information, and that's how I'm coming across it. And I won't name those companies because I don't think that's fair. All right, Gail in Chicago. She had a purpose versus passion question. How does she figure out what she wants to do? Now, Gail is a 30-year professional. She's done many things, but just to name a few, she's done real estate and technical sales, technology sales. But she's not old, okay? Gail's 50. Now, maybe you guys think that's old, you young college kids, but I'm 40. 50 ain't old. So if you've done something for 30 years, and you've done a lot of different things, and now you're getting ready to re-enter the workforce, or you're open to new opportunities, how do you figure out what you want to do? Now, this is a deep philosophical question, and I can tell you that I get this question a lot because being a Marine and helping Marines transition out of the military, I have a passion for my military brothers and sisters, and I focus on this question a lot with them. And what I tell them is, and allow me to tell you a little story about my life. But when you look back over your 30 years, Gail, when you look back over your Marine Corps military career, when you look back over your career, anybody who is looking at what do I do? I'm at this crossroads and I'm not sure if I want to keep doing what I'm doing. There's two questions I always ask the person. And the first is, as you look back over it doesn't work if you're just graduating college, by the way. So if you're graduating college, tune this out or save it in your database until you need it 20 years from now. But what have you done over your career that you were the happiest doing? Okay. That's the first question. Think back when you were the happiest. And then the second thing is think back at your career. What were you the most fulfilled doing? Now, sometimes you're blessed enough that that question has the same answer. You were happiest doing this and you were the most fulfilled doing this. But truthfully, for me, they were vastly different. And it was imperative that I knew those answers. So when I was with our Wounded Warrior Regiment, I went to BAMC, Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, once every, 2 months at the least, maybe once a month. And I'd go out there. Now, if you're not familiar with what BAMC is if you were a burn victim in the military, if you were in a Hummer that exploded and caught on fire and you, by the grace of God, survived, you go to BAMC. BAMC is for all burn victims. So burn victims are a phenomenal group to be around, but a very difficult group to be around because, first of all, it's humbling when you walk into a room and a guy has no nose, no ears, and no lips. And you can see his teeth, you can see his gums, you can see his muscular and skeletal structure because he's got no skin. I never left BAMC without crying. My drive from San Antonio to Houston, which is roughly 3 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, I never didn't cry on the way home. I always cried driving home. But that job, I was the most fulfilled in, okay? Helping these guys, helping my heroes who have lost their arms, lost their legs, paralyzed from their waist down, traumatic brain injuries, burn victims. I have never been more fulfilled. But after 2.5, 3 years of doing that and assisting our brothers, mostly brothers, some sisters, I was not happy. I probably needed to see a psychiatrist, honestly, some therapy to get me through my issues because I went through this spiral, honestly. I would be hanging out with a burn victim today who is praising God to be alive. I'm hanging out with a guy who lost both his arms, who's thanking God to be alive. I'm hanging out with a guy who's paralyzed from the waist down saying it could be worse. I could have been burned. Everybody is thanking God to be alive. And here I am being depressed about something stupid and dumb. And what does that mean? That means that then I'd get on me. I'd be like, well, dude, you got nothing to be upset about. You got nothing. You're not this guy. You're not a burn victim. You should be happy. But then I'd feel guilty about feeling guilty. And then I'd be annoyed that I was guilty about that. And bottom line, it was just a spiraling cycle. And after 3 years, I'm glad that the job was over. I'm glad I did it. It is the most fulfilling time of my life, but I could not do a career like that because I would be a bear to be around and I wouldn't be a service to anybody. But that was the most fulfilling time of my career. Now, the happiest time of my career is when I'm doing this, is when I'm working with someone on their resume. Believe it or not, I love coaching people because people need information and they're very grateful and I love helping. So that's kind of why I've started this little venture here is because this is the happiest I've been. Now, if I can make a living at it, then great. So with that, things are good, but as you're evaluating your passion and purpose, figure out when you were the happiest, what were you doing? Figure out when you were the most fulfilled, what you were doing. If they happen to align, you got your answer. That's what you're pursuing. If they don't align, can you make a career at where you were the happiest? That's kind of my advice. Or can you do your passion? Can you do your fulfillment project as something on the side that doesn't encompass all of you every day? Because let's be honest, when you start your own business, when you start your job, most of us just dive into our job and it becomes kind of who we are. So be aware that fulfillment sometimes can lead to unhappy lives. All right. Again, any questions, feel free to ask them. We're almost running out of time. So I'm going to get to 2 more of my questions here and then that's it. Unless there's a live question, I'll make sure I hit it. If you're nervous that the job you apply to is far below your salary expectations and compensations level, what should you do when you're interviewed? I kind of hit on this, so I'll say it's best to discuss it in advance. First of all, it's best to wait to discuss it until it's brought up, okay? When you're in an interview process, you want to meet as many people as you possibly can to make a great impression with as many people as you can. Because let's be honest, you might not be the perfect person for this job. And chances are, just by the odds, you're not. Because they're probably meeting 10 people. So there's a 10% chance you're going to get this job. Now you might be an unbelievable candidate, so there might be a 40% chance or 50% chance you get the job. But bottom line, if you're like an average person, there's a 1 out of the number of candidates chance to get the job. So you want to see as many people in that company as you possibly can to make the best impression. If you talk to the phone screener and you're afraid the job is paying 70 and you're looking for 100 and she never brings it up or he never brings it up and you say, hey, look, what's this job paying? You're gone. I promise you, you're gone. They don't want to talk to you. They know you're focused on money and they probably already know that the job pays less than it's supposed to. So they're not going to want to disqualify you. You want to wait to bring it up until it's brought up, because then you can talk to as many people. And then when it is brought up, you can say, well, based on this role, from what I can tell, I would expect it to. We've already talked about that. I would expect the salary to be somewhere in this range. However, I don't really know where the market shifted in the past couple of years, blah, 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 or the past couple of months. And you can go on from there. But you need to be sure that you wait until they ask you. Don't ask them. The only way around that, here's a great way around that. Let's just say you're looking for a job, right? And you get a message on LinkedIn that someone liked your profile. And they say, hey, look, we're looking for this and you seem like a really strong fit. Are you interested or do you know anybody that is interested? If you are interested or not, you can always come back the same way. You can say, look, I don't really think I'm interested. I'm really happy with where I'm at. If you're not working, well, then obviously you can't really quite say that. But if you are working somewhere, I'm really happy with where I'm at. However, I do have a couple of contacts who might be interested. Can you give me the salary range so I don't waste their time? By you doing that, you're now going to get the salary, hopefully. You're not looked at as a threat by the person on the other side. And then once they tell you, now you can evaluate if it's the right opportunity for you or not. But because you are asking for a buddy, it makes it a little easier. So that's always some advice I always give out there. Sharon in Phoenix, Arizona, I was laid off. How do I explain this on your resume? Typically, you don't. Now, because I just talked about the absolute statement at the beginning of this discussion, I'm not going to say you would never put that on your resume. But typically, there's no reason to put a reason why you were laid off, a reason why there's a date gap. You need to make sure you're ready for the story. If there's a considerable date gap of a year or 6 months or more, then maybe you need to be able to have that in a cover letter. You need to be able to address it. But if you were laid off for 1, 2, or 3 months, especially right now during a global pandemic, it kind of goes without saying that they're going to assume that you were laid off because of a pandemic and you don't need to address it on your resume. Remember, your resume isn't a story. Your resume is a list of accomplishments. It is not a story about who you are and how you got to where you are. It is a list of things that you've done while you've been there. Okay? And what I will say, though, more often than not, though, Sharon, is understand why you were laid off. When you look in the mirror, don't lie to yourself. Meaning, I don't know you, Sharon. So Sharon's not a client. Sharon's not someone I've actually talked with this week personally, one-on-one. Some of these questions were. But Sharon wasn't. But if you were laid off, if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, yep, my numbers were great. I was a top tier employee. I never complained. I had a positive outlook, a proactive ability. I was great. Be honest with yourself, though, then great. But if Sharon, if you were always complaining, if you were late, if you didn't really like anybody at the office, they loved you, but you didn't like anybody, maybe they didn't like you either. But be aware that in those situations, you need to evaluate why you were laid off. And it might be that you were laid off because you're just bad at your job. COVID-19 was an excuse to use to lay you off. And if that's the case, you need to figure out why you were bad at your job. And it might be that you hate your job, but you've been doing it for 10 years. So now it's time you just got to keep on doing it for the next 20 or 30 until you're ready to retire. That's a bad answer. We only live once, right? YOLO, as my brother-in-law says all the time. Make sure that you understand why you were laid off and make sure you're really passionate about the job you're doing. Now, we all need jobs to get us from point A to point B, but make sure when you get to point B, you know what you're looking for and you can apply towards that, because otherwise, every crisis that happens, you're going to get laid off and you're going to be able to explain the crisis away based on, oh, the market crashed, oil and gas crashed, there was COVID-19. However, be honest with yourself and understand if Sharon, if you were laid off because you're bad at your job or really they laid off a whole bunch of people and you just got caught up in it. That's the more important question to answer. And if you know the answer to that question, you're going to have a much better interview when you're applying to something else and they say, why were you laid off? And you can just be genuine and authentic. I think I'm going to do a talk on this on Monday about being genuine, authentic in an interview. I think one of the skills that I've been blessed with is just being who I am and just being very genuine, authentic, and honest with everyone I work with, and just letting them know that we're all flawed. We all have weaknesses. None of us are perfect. And all the advice I've given you over the last 34 minutes is my opinion. And it's not going to be right in every situation because there absolutely are no absolutes. So with that, I thank you so much for joining. Please share this with anybody who's currently in your network who's looking for work. This advice can only help them. Please subscribe to my YouTube page, Hired How to Get the Job. All of my content on Facebook, all of my content on LinkedIn ends up over there on the YouTube channel, but not all of my YouTube channel information ends up on both of those locations. They end up on one or the other. So with that, thank you so much. Feel free to like this, to tag this, to ask me questions, and if you need help with your resume, you need help with mock interviews, and you're getting ready to get back out there, and you got some interviews lined up, but you're kind of nervous about a couple questions, and send them my way. I'll happily help you with them. Most of the time, conversations are free. So again, no absolutes, but most of the time, all conversations are free, and that's a matter if we both agree to work with each other. So with that, I hope you're all doing well. Have a blessed weekend. Thanks so much. Bye.